He threw the electric bill at me and shouted, "Freeloaders don't deserve heat or light." That's when I knew, to him I was no longer a mother, just a burden. But he didn't know the house was in my name. He tried to erase me, legally, emotionally, completely. I came back with documents, testimony, and a voice he couldn't silence. He tried to prove I was crazy, but in the end he stood in court and I walked out free. And it all started with a $198 bill. My dear, your feedback means so much to me. Please let me know where you're watching from and whether you enjoyed this story. It's truly, truly important to me. Thank you so much. No heat, no light, not even a mother. It wasn't the bill that hurt, not even the words. It was the way he looked at me when he said it, as if I were no longer real, just a shadow stealing warmth. I used to say that my son was the only thing I ever did right. Not my teaching job, not my marriage, not the volunteering or the garden club or the perfectly polished hardwood floors I kept for 27 years. No, just him. Eli, born on a quiet morning in March with lungs loud enough to shame the geese behind the hospital. I held him like he was made of gold and silence and promise. And for a long time, I believed he saw me the same way. Not as a woman, not as a burden, but as home. I was wrong. It happened on a Tuesday, one of those gray, bloated Tuesdays where the sky just hangs there like a wet rag. We were in the kitchen. I was folding laundry at the table, his shirts mostly, because Rachel worked late and he always said he didn't have the time. Eli walked in, his boots still wet, holding a crumpled envelope in one hand and a face I didn't recognize in the other. "This yours?" he said, tossing the bill onto the table. The envelope slid across the surface like a blade. I glanced down. Electricity, $198.43. My name in faded ink, the same name I'd written on his birth certificate. "I thought you said you'd pay it this month," he said, voice flat. I was going to. I just haven't gone to the bank yet," I replied. Surprised by the sudden heat in the room, he laughed. But it wasn't a laugh, it was a bark, dry and sharp. "Yeah? Well, let me help you with that." And before I could move, before I could even blink, he grabbed the bill and threw it at me. It hit my shoulder, bounced to the floor, and then he said it. "Freeloaders don't deserve heat or light. You want to live here? Pay. Otherwise, get the hell out." The worst part wasn't the words, it was that he meant them. He'd been waiting to say them, and when he did, it felt like a door closing forever. I didn't scream, didn't cry. I just picked up the envelope, folded it back into its broken crease, and stood very still. The room buzzed. The refrigerator hummed. The light above the sink flickered. A quiet reminder of all the small things that held us together, now falling apart. "I didn't realize I was just a guest here," I whispered. Eli shrugged. "Well, you don't pay rent. You don't work. I'm just saying what nobody else wants to. Nobody else. Meaning Rachel. Meaning their son, my grandson, who looked at me these days like I was just a chair in the corner. Something old. Unwanted." That night, I sat on the back porch with a blanket that didn't smell like home anymore. The air was cold. Colder than the last Michigan spring I remembered, even though we were in North Carolina now. I watched the light go out in the kitchen. He hadn't even waited for me to finish eating before shutting it off, as if saving electricity was worth more than letting his mother see her plate. I raised a boy who used to cry when a bird hit the window. Now he throws bills at me like I'm the dead thing on the glass. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed up thinking about all the birthdays I planned, the scraped knees I kissed, the nights I stayed up sewing Halloween costumes because he wanted to be a dragon, not a ghost. I remembered him at 12 whispering, "Don't ever leave, Mom." And I remembered myself, foolish and smiling, saying, "Never." But never has a funny way of turning into now. And now, my son was a stranger, and I was tired of being ashamed. I didn't know it yet, but that envelope on the floor, the one that hit me like an insult, would be the start of something much bigger, something that would make him regret every word he thought I'd forget. You don't always leave because you're not welcome. Sometimes you leave because you refuse to become smaller just to fit their comfort. The next morning, I didn't make breakfast. For years, even when I was angry, tired, or sick, I had always sliced the fruit, made the toast, brewed the coffee. Even after retirement, even after my hands started to ache in the morning like they'd been twisted in sleep by ghosts of chores past. But that day, I let the kitchen stay quiet, let the sink stay empty, let them notice. They didn't. No one asked where I was. No one knocked on the door. And when I came downstairs to pour myself a cup of tea, Rachel and Eli were already gone, their voices a fading murmur in the driveway. I stood in the living room wrapped in my oldest cardigan, the one I used to wear when Eli was sick as a child and he'd ask me to stay just 5 more minutes. And I looked around. Not at the furniture, not at the family photos, but at what was missing. There was no us left here, only them and me, in the corner like a coat someone forgot to hang up. That was the moment I made the decision. Not with rage, not with sadness, with precision. If they didn't want me here, they wouldn't have to say it again. I'd leave, but not quietly, and certainly not empty. I went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed that used to be mine, now a shared guest room somewhere between inconvenience and apology, and pulled out a notebook I hadn't opened since my husband died. It was brown leather, the corners curled, full of lists, grocery needs, garden plans, favorite recipes. On the last page, in faded ink, was a quote I once clipped from a magazine. "Dignity is when you don't lower your voice, you raise your value." So I started writing. Not a letter, not a goodbye. Instructions, a plan for what I'd take, for what I'd leave, and for what I'd change after I walked out that door. I called Linda, my old neighbor, now retired, a widow with a strong back and a sharper tongue. I asked if her guest room still had that little floral quilt I gave her for Christmas. "It's yours if you want it back," she said. "No." I smiled. "I just might come sleep under it a while." She didn't ask questions. Real friends don't need context when your voice sounds like you've been holding your breath for too many years. I packed slowly. Not clothes, not makeup. I packed the photographs Eli hadn't looked at in years. The letters I wrote him when he was in college. The ones he never answered, but I kept anyway. I packed the wool scarf my mother knitted in 1954. The one I wore the night I went into labor. I didn't pack shame. I didn't pack guilt. I left those in the drawer, under the unpaid bills and the silence. Because if you're going to be discarded, you might as well walk out whole. I left the ring he gave me on my 65th birthday, a silver band with my initials. I placed it in his sock drawer next to the tie I bought him for his first job interview. Let it all sit together in that quiet drawer of things that once mattered. I didn't write a note. I just placed the electric bill on the kitchen table again, flat, unfolded, with 220s tucked inside, so no one could say I left without paying my share. When I closed the door behind me, the wind caught it for a second, like the house was hesitating. But I didn't. Because sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's reclaiming space, like even if that space is just the width of your own breath. He thought I was gone for good. But what I did next, with a lawyer, a signature, and one final visit, would haunt him far more than my absence ever could. He thought I'd be too proud to come back. He forgot I still had the deed. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say to someone who erased you is not, "I forgive you." It's, "I was never gone. I was just quiet." 3 days after I left, the silence in their house must have changed flavor, from triumph to tension. I imagine Rachel asking where I went, Eli shrugging, pretending he didn't care. But even cowards feel the emptiness when the person they mistreated doesn't come crawling back. Except I didn't disappear. I repositioned. I stayed with Linda, whose guest room smelled like lavender and old books, and whose silence wasn't sharp like Eli's, but soft, like shared wisdom between two women who have seen too much to speak quickly. Every morning I drank my coffee on her porch swing, reading case files and sipping Resolve. Every night I looked at the deed, the one with my name, alone. You see, after my husband died, he left the house to me. He didn't trust Eli. Even back then, he saw the shift. Eli was charming, but slippery. Kind, but conditional. So James made the choice quietly. Let her have the roof she raised this family under. She's earned that. But I never told Eli. I didn't want to make him feel small. Funny, isn't it? I protected him from the truth while he threw bills at me for the lights I paid for. With Linda's help and Marta, her niece, a property attorney, I prepared everything. Paperwork, certified letters, a polite but legally binding notice. Eli and Rachel had 90 days to vacate. Not out of spite, but because I was done paying the price for someone else's ego.
When I showed up at the door again, a week later, mid-morning, with a manila envelope and a spine straight as fence post, Eli opened it wearing yesterday's shirt and the same shocked expression he had at 15 when I caught him smoking behind the shed. "Mom?" I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I handed him the envelope. "This is notice of legal repossession. You'll find the deed attached, along with a relocation timeline and resources for assistance. You have until May 1st. He blinked. "You're kicking us out?" I paused, then answered, slow, quiet, and true. "No. You kicked me out. I'm just reclaiming what's mine." He wanted to say something, but shame has a way of sealing a man's mouth faster than any mother ever could. Rachel came to the door holding their son. She looked at me like she hadn't seen me in years. Not truly. "I didn't know it was your name on the deed," she said softly. "You didn't ask." She nodded, held the boy tighter. I met his eyes. He didn't look away this time. I saw something shift in him, like a curtain blowing inward. Not yet understanding, but curious. Maybe he'd ask questions one day. Maybe he'd want to know why Grandma left, and why she came back not to cry, but to stand. I turned and walked away. Not because I was finished, but because I had only just started. They thought the papers were the end, but what I did next, in court, in community, and inside myself, would make sure they never forgot the cost of trying to erase a mother. They tried to paint me as crazy, so I framed myself in truth. When a woman is no longer afraid to be seen, those who tried to hide her will learn just how bright she can burn. I knew they wouldn't take it well. Eli had always been good at rewriting stories. Even as a boy, he could cry on cue, shift blame like it was a board game, and make strangers believe that he was the wounded one. And Rachel, well, Rachel knew how to sharpen that image until it gleamed. She's old. She's confused. She's not what she used to be. They didn't need to call me crazy, not directly. They just let the word float between sentences, let it hang in the air like bad perfume, faint enough to deny, strong enough to linger. 3 days after I served the eviction notice, a letter came. Not from Eli, from a lawyer, his. It was polite, clinical, and utterly venomous. "Our clients are concerned about your mental fitness to manage the property in question. In the interest of family harmony, they request a third-party evaluation. Until such time, we ask for a hold on enforcement." It was brilliant, really. If you can't beat her with facts, question her mind. But they forgot something. I was a teacher for 36 years. I had dealt with teenagers who lied to their parents, who cheated on tests, who forged notes and made up stories, and I had always known how to respond with evidence. So I didn't get angry. I got documentation. I went to Dr. Phelps, the same therapist I'd seen years ago after James died. She looked at me with a softness I hadn't seen in months, a kind of silent applause behind her glasses. "Do you know why you're here?" she asked gently. "Because my son thinks if he makes me look broken, he won't have to admit he broke me." She nodded. "Then let's prove otherwise. I passed every test: memory, cognition, judgment, emotional regulation. My hands may have trembled when I held the pen, but my thoughts were sharp as the morning wind that cuts through Carolina pines. 2 days later, I had my certificate. Patient is of sound mind and capable of managing personal and legal affairs independently. Stamped, signed, sealed. I made 10 copies. The next step was court. Not because I wanted a fight, but because I needed a record. I needed something they couldn't twist at the next dinner party. Something their friends and coworkers and future landlords couldn't ignore. Because when they painted me unstable, they weren't just trying to steal my house, they were trying to erase my credibility. Linda went with me to the courthouse. She wore her church pearls, I wore the blue suit James liked, the one he said made me look like I knew everything before it happened. We filed a protective property order, citing emotional coercion, misrepresentation, and attempted legal manipulation by family members. We included the therapist's letter, the deed, the timeline, and a copy of the electric bill. Yes, that electric bill, because sometimes the smallest thing becomes the loudest proof. When the judge glanced at me and asked why I was filing this on my own behalf, I answered without hesitation, because if I don't stand up now, I'll have to sit down for the rest of my life. He looked at me a moment longer, then nodded.
Stamped it, and in that sound, that heavy thump of justice hitting paper, I felt something inside me click back into place. That night, I didn't go home to silence. I went home to dignity, and for the first time in months, I slept like I belonged in my own skin. What Eli did next was worse than legal threats. He tried to turn my grandson against me, and when I heard what he told him about crazy grandma, I knew the next move had to come from my heart, but hit like truth. He looked at me like I was dangerous, and that broke me more than words ever could. A child can break your heart, but when a child no longer recognizes your heart as safe, that's when silence becomes unbearable. It happened on a Sunday, the kind of day that pretends to be soft, clouds drifting like thoughts, the air heavy with the kind of stillness that always comes before a storm you can't quite name. Linda was out buying potting soil. The house was quiet, warm, full of the scent of chamomile and baked pears. I was folding laundry when the knock came, 3 soft raps. Careful, uncertain, I opened the door, and there he was. My grandson, 11 years old in sneakers too clean to belong to a child who plays, wearing a shirt I bought him for his birthday last year, standing on my porch like I was a stranger. "Hi," he said, almost whispering. "Hi," I answered, swallowing everything I wanted to say. He stood there a moment, shifting his weight, hands deep in his pockets. "Dad said you're mad at us." I breathed in, held it. "I'm not mad," I said finally. "I'm disappointed, but not at you." He nodded, but he didn't come inside. He just stood there, looking past me, at the hall, at the framed photo still hanging, the one of him on my shoulders when he was 5, covered in beach sand and joy. Then he asked, "Are you sick?" And something inside me cracked so loud I thought the floor might split open. There are questions that come from curiosity, and there are questions planted like landmines, meant to go off beneath the weight of love. I knelt down, slowly so my knees wouldn't betray me, met his eyes. They were his mother's eyes, wide, thoughtful, a little too aware for his age. "Did your dad tell you I was sick?" He looked down, shrugged. He said maybe you're confused, that maybe you're not remembering stuff right, that maybe it's okay to forgive people who don't know what they're doing. I felt a tear escape, not because I was sad, but because this was the consequence I hadn't prepared for. Not the eviction, not the lawyer, not the courtroom, but this, being rewritten in my grandson's memory before I had a chance to finish my story. "Can I tell you a secret?" I said softly. He nodded. I pulled the electric bill from my purse. The original. This is what started it, a piece of paper. Not cancer, not dementia, not confusion. It's just a bill, yes. But when someone throws something at you, even something small, and tells you you're not wanted, you start to wonder if love was ever what they meant in the first place. He looked at the paper, then at me. "I don't think you're sick, Grandma." And that sentence, so small, so childlike, was the most powerful testimony I'd heard in weeks. We sat on the porch. I told him stories, not of courtrooms or documents, but of when his father was little, how Eli cried when he lost his first tooth, how he used to fall asleep with my hand in his because the world was big and I was the one thing he trusted to never leave. "So what happened?" my grandson asked. And I said, "Sometimes people forget where they came from, and when that happens, the people who raised them have to remind them, not with yelling, but with truth." When Rachel came to pick him up, she didn't look at me, but she didn't stop him from hugging me. And that hug, tight, wordless, real, was more binding than any contract Eli's lawyer ever drafted. They can twist facts, they can hire attorneys, they can send letters, but they can't rewrite the parts of me that live in my grandson's arms. But just when I thought the storm had passed, a notice arrived in the mail, not from Eli, but from someone I hadn't heard from in years, and what he revealed about my son changed everything. We all protect the people we love from the truth, but one day someone comes along and shows us that protection was just denial dressed as mercy. It came in an envelope with no return address, postmarked from 2 counties over. No handwriting I recognized, tight, slanted, pressed into the paper like someone had carved it with guilt. I almost threw it away. Thought it was another political flyer, another reminder that the world outside my home had teeth too. But something made me pause. The way my name was written, Mrs. Eleanor G. Halston, not Mom, not Ms. Halston, not E. Halston, but the full name with the middle initial, like someone who used to know me once and didn't know how to start again. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single page, typed, no greeting, no signature, just this. I worked with your son for 7 years. We started out in construction, commercial builds. I admired him. He was quick, confident, charming. But that charm had a cost. He kept 2 sets of books on every job, one for the office, one for himself. I covered for him once, then twice. Then I stopped sleeping. When I finally refused, he blacklisted me. Had his friends block my contracts. Said I was unstable. Sound familiar? You deserve to know this because no matter how well a man hides his cracks at home, eventually the people around him see where he's split. He's not who you think he is. I'm sorry it took me so long to tell you. I read it twice. Then again, the words didn't shout, they didn't accuse, they confirmed. Confirmed what I'd tried so hard not to believe, that maybe Eli's betrayal wasn't sudden, maybe it was years in the making, maybe I just didn't want to see it. I sat down at the kitchen table, the letter trembling slightly in my hand. Linda came in with groceries. One look at my face and she said nothing. Just poured me tea, sat across from me, waited. I passed her the paper. She read it slowly, her lips tightening like cloth pulled too tight on a line. When she was done, she folded it, slid it back across the table and said, "Now you know, and now you get to decide who you're going to be with that knowledge." That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid, but because I was angry in a new way. Not just at Eli, but at myself, for thinking that love could substitute accountability, for believing that raising someone meant they couldn't fall, for covering cracks with memories. I spent the next morning going through old files, looking for anything, tax forms, business cards, loan documents, anything with Eli's handwriting, his choices, his record. What I found wasn't criminal, but it was clear. He'd borrowed money against my name, small amounts, subtle, but traceable. He didn't just throw a bill at me. He borrowed against my dignity and didn't think I'd notice. By the end of the day, I had a folder, not for revenge, for record, because the next time someone told me to doubt my memory, I'd have paper louder than voices. But when I tried to file the claim, the clerk pulled me aside and said, "Ma'am, there's already a pending case with your name on it." And that's when I realized Eli had made his final move. The most dangerous lie isn't the one they tell about you. It's the one they try to make you believe about yourself. And the moment you reject it, you become unstoppable. The woman behind the counter looked at me with the kind of expression that tells you she's about to say something she didn't want to be the one to say. "Ma'am," she said, lowering her voice, "there's already a file open under your name, opened last week, by a family member." My stomach dropped like a stone in dark water. "What kind of file?" She hesitated. "A petition to assess mental competency, filed by a Mr. Eli Halston. He's requesting temporary conservatorship of your estate." There it was, the final blow. Not a confrontation, not an apology, a document, filed behind my back, signed, sealed, and meant to erase me. I didn't cry. I thanked her, left the office, and sat in my car. The steering wheel felt foreign in my hands, like I didn't know what direction home was anymore. But I did. Because home isn't where you live. It's what you stand on when the floor's been pulled out from under you. I drove straight to Marta. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just opened her laptop, cracked her knuckles, and said, "Let's tear this apart." For the next 2 weeks, we built the case. I took evaluations, gathered testimonials, called old students, co-workers, neighbors. We assembled a record of clarity, of memory, of leadership, of logic, and most of all, of betrayal. Because conservatorship isn't about protection. Not here, not now. It was about control, silencing, property, and he almost succeeded. Almost. The day of the hearing, I wore navy blue. Not because it was flattering, but because it made me feel like a witness in my own defense and a judge in my own trial. Eli was there, polished, prepared, smiling like a man who thought he'd already won. He didn't look at me. Maybe he couldn't. Or maybe he thought he didn't have to. But the thing about erasing someone is you better make sure they can't still write. The judge listened to the statements. To Eli, talking about forgetfulness, confusion, safety. To me, presenting records, proof, timelines. To Marta, who outlined a pattern of financial exploitation, manipulation, and coercive language. And finally, to my grandson, who stood up, trembling, holding his paper with two hands. My grandma tells the truth. She remembers things I forget. She made me hot cocoa when Dad was too busy. That was all he said, but it was more than enough. The ruling was swift. The petition was dismissed. The court recognized abuse of process. An investigation was opened into Eli's financial conduct. And I walked out of that courtroom not just as myself, but as someone the world could no longer question. He tried to take away my light, but in the end he handed me the match. I live alone now, in a house that holds memory, yes, but no ghosts. The garden is mine again, the keys mine, the silence mine, but not empty anymore. I see my grandson every Sunday. We drink cocoa, talk about books. We speak the kind of truth only survivors speak. And sometimes I look at the electric bill, framed now on the wall by the kitchen, a reminder that even small paper can carry the weight of a revolution.